Hawaii was overwhelmed by flooding and volcanic activity almost at the same time. In March alone, about 2 trillion gallons of water fell across the islands. Before the floodwaters could recede, Kilauea entered its 44th eruption episode in 16 months, sending lava fountains as high as 800 feet and ash up to 16,000 feet into the sky. On Oahu, about 200 people had to be rescued from floodwaters in a single weekend. On the Big Island, more than 300 students from Volcano School of Arts and Sciences were evacuated after hot rocks began falling near the school. Highway 11, a key road linking 2 major districts of the island, was shut down in both directions. In many areas, residents were not only watching water rise, but were also forced to live under air heavily affected by sulfur dioxide after the eruption. At the same time, roads were blocked, schools were disrupted, air quality worsened, and many communities were pushed closer to isolation. What makes this situation more serious is that none of it happened in a place that still had full capacity to withstand another blow. Before the volcano erupted on April 9th, Hawaii had already been hit by 2 back-to-back Kona lows on March 10th and March 19th. The prolonged heavy rain left the ground fully saturated. There was nowhere left for the water to go, so each new round of rain quickly turned into added pressure on roads, homes, and infrastructure that had already been damaged. When the third blow came in the form of volcanic activity, all of the weak points were exposed at once. The damage was already clear. A more than 100-year-old high school on the Big Island was heavily damaged, with 96 of its 124 classrooms unusable from March 19 onward. Damage to airports across the state was reported at $245 million. But those numbers still do not fully show the real problem. The truly serious issue is that Hawaii is no longer facing a disaster that already happened. It is facing a chain of overlapping crises that is still continuing. So the story in Hawaii is not simply about heavy rain followed by a volcano. The real story is that multiple risks appeared one after another, while the state had already been weakened by earlier extreme weather. That is what made the crisis more severe and much harder to control. But this is the detail that tells the whole story. Before Kilauea erupted again, the islands had already been under pressure from heavy rain for weeks. 2 back-to-back Kona lows in March did not just cause flooding. They left the ground unable to absorb more water, pushed many areas into overload, and began to disrupt normal life. Once the ground was fully saturated, every new round of rain stopped being ordinary pressure. It turned into runoff, moving straight into roads, neighborhoods, and places that had already been damaged. The problem is not simply that Hawaii faced extreme weather and then a volcano. The problem is that the risks had already started piling on top of each other before residents had any time to recover. On April 8th, Hawaii County officials had to sign an emergency proclamation with unusually broad language because they were dealing at the same time with flood risks, coastal hazards, and volcanic activity. Just 1 day later, Kilauea erupted. That detail shows that officials had already seen a very dangerous situation taking shape. Not one isolated threat, but several threats converging at the same time. And when that happens in Hawaii, the consequences become more serious, much faster than in many other places. These islands sit isolated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. When transportation infrastructure is affected, the ability of communities to adjust drops very quickly. A key road on the Big Island had to be shut down. Movement became more restricted. Many daily activities were disrupted. Schools began to face major impacts. Air quality also worsened after the eruption. In other words, within a very short time, Hawaii was dealing at once with pressure from the ground, from the sky, and from the limits of the island's own infrastructure. When the situation in Hawaii was still unstable after the heavy rain, the eruption on April 9th immediately added even more pressure. At that point, the problem was no longer just about the weather or volcanic activity. It was about the daily lives of residents being directly affected on several fronts at once. A key road on the Big Island had to be closed. Schools were disrupted. Air quality worsened in some areas. Even the most ordinary parts of daily life became harder. More than 300 students from Volcano School of Arts and Sciences had to evacuate when the area around the school was no longer safe. This detail shows that the disaster was not just something seen in news reports or numbers. It went straight into everyday life, into education, into the mindset of families, and into the sense of insecurity across the whole community. A more than 100-year-old high school on the Big Island was also heavily damaged, with most of its classrooms no longer usable. That shows the impact of the disaster did not stop at the emergency stage. It left lasting disruption to normal life, especially for children and for families living in the affected areas. What is concerning is that even after those disruptions, the risk still did not end. Many areas had not yet recovered from the heavy rain before they were forced to face new pressure from the volcano. As a result, residents have had to continue living with uncertainty, not knowing whether the situation may get worse again. The issue in Hawaii right now is not whether the disaster has ended or not. The issue is that residents are still living with its consequences. Many families have not been able to return to a normal routine. Education has been disrupted. Travel has been affected. In some areas, living conditions are no longer as stable as they were before. So the crisis does not end when the rain weakens or when volcanic activity temporarily slows down. It continues inside the daily lives of residents. The biggest concern is that Hawaii may still face new pressure before the old damage has even been dealt with. Residents are not only carrying the consequences of what has already happened, they are also living with the risk that the situation could get worse again. That is the heaviest part of this story. Not one emergency moment, but a prolonged sense of uncertainty, while daily life remains suspended under multiple unresolved risks. Looking more broadly, this is no longer just Hawaii's story. Many places around the world are facing the same kind of risk. Extreme weather is arriving more often and more intensely, and communities are being hit with new pressure before they have time to recover from the last one. Climate change does not create volcanoes, but it is making heavy rain, flooding, and environmental crises harder to endure in places that are already vulnerable. So the final question is very clear. If the warning signs were already there in advance, why are residents still the ones paying the highest price when the crisis erupts? And how many other communities are already living in a similar situation? If you are living in Hawaii or are directly experiencing the impact of the recent heavy rain and volcanic activity, share what conditions are actually like in your area in the comments. And if you want to keep following the latest developments in Hawaii, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next updates.